A new study titled Female Genital Mutilation Amongst Sudanese Migrants in Greater Cairo, Perception and Trends is by Equality Now and Tadwein for Gender Studies, and it provides valuable insights into how migration and exposure to new cultural environments and social networks are influencing female genital mutilation practices since Sudan's devastating war erupted in April 2023. Over 1 million people have fled to neighboring Egypt seeking refuge. Both countries have laws banning female genital mutilation, also known as FGM, but despite this, Sudan and Egypt have some of the highest rates of FGM globally. But the report is actually pointing out the fact that in Greater Cairo area, where an estimated 4 million Sudanese migrants and refugees now live, displacement has shaken the foundations of FGM. How? Let's find out from Paleki Ayang, gender advisor in the Middle East and North Africa, who is actually going to join us to chat a little bit about this. Paleki, welcome on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk a little bit just about female genital mutilation before we get into this study. It's a process that keeps coming in and out, and each year we speak about FGM. Why is it so important for us to continue to speak about this important matter?
It's very important. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think it's very important for us to continue speaking about this because it's a practice that is still practiced and it's very prevalent. It's still happening in different parts of the world. It's happening in North Africa, in East Africa, in West Africa, in Asia, even in the Americas and the Caribbean. FGM is still practiced. So it's important. And as time goes on and as the practice also changes, the way it's presented, I think it's important that we continue to talk about it because it's the only way we are able to protect women and girls from this violation.
Yeah. Paleki, tell us a little bit about this study that you are involved in looking at FGM and migration. One would think that the two are not related, but why did you investigate into this relationship between migration and female genital mutilation, and why looking at the populations in Sudan and Egypt?
Well, I think that's a very important question. As you mentioned in your introduction, both Sudan and Egypt are countries that has high numbers and high prevalence rates of FGM. Globally, they are amongst the top two. Our statistics show that at least 86% of women and girls between the age of 15 and 49 have undergone some type of FGM or some type of FGM practice. So, as you mentioned, with the war and with that migration and with that movement, what we wanted to understand is what happens when a deeply rooted practice like FGM, what happens to that practice when people migrate? What we wanted to find out is, do these practices continue? Do they adapt? Are they left behind with migration? And that's basically the motivation behind which we decided to undertake this study. And also to mention that we specifically mentioned Greater Cairo because that's where the Sudanese are mostly populated in that area.
Well, Paleki, I want to bring this in because we're speaking about a particular practice which is cultural, which is traditional to both, Sudan and Egypt and still practiced, as you said. With migration taking place, how much of a factor does it play when traditions and practices, that exist from both ends can be sort of exchanged? Because it's a different thing if maybe, the Egyptians weren't practicing FGM and the Sudanese were to come in and, they would have to recreate a practice or a tradition that didn't exist there. But it exists in both places. And so how is that interaction like?
So, as we all know, displacement is very complex. We have on one hand, displacement could weaken traditional systems, some of which could also potentially uphold FGM. Because the way FGM is practiced in Sudan, you find that grandmothers play a very, very important role. With displacement, grandmothers might be far from that setting. Also in Sudan, FGM is done by midwives, trusted midwives. So with displacement, these midwives might not be available. And also, FGM is illegal in both countries. So in Egypt, the country is functioning, so there might be legal repercussions for the practice. So one of the things that clearly came out from the study is that families said that, for example, not being surrounded by their extended kin, by their extended family, gave them space at least to rethink or maybe even have the option to opt out of FGM. But another thing also that we find interesting is that as much as displacement could disrupt families' decision to practice FGM, we also know that it could also be a trigger for families to hold tighter onto traditions. For many Sudanese families, based on our study findings, especially those who might be feeling marginalized or maybe under threat in a new country, FGM then becomes not just a tradition, it becomes more of a marker for survival. It's seen as a way the families, the mothers, the parents could protect their daughters from what they perceive as maybe immorality or maybe to maintain links to the Sudanese identity. So we could say that displacement is a double-edged sword. It presents opportunity for people to abandon the practice, and that can only happen if it's supported by community education, by legal clarity, by safe spaces where communities can explore alternatives, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, stay there on the line. We'll continue this conversation because your insights are very, very profound there, Paleki, because it seems with what you were saying that, as much as there is an illegality in Sudan and Egypt when it comes to female genital mutilation, there's still a traditional element to it that is actually on the ground. People still believe in FGM, and I'm interested in some of the insights that you found with your interviews on the ground and what are the views that people have around female genital mutilation. Is there a chasm between civil society? Is there a gap between what governments are implementing to what are the traditions on the ground? We'll speak a little bit about that as we continue this conversation. We're speaking to Paleki Ayang, gender advisor in the Middle East and North Africa region, and she's part of the Equality Now and Tadwein for Gender Studies. We looked at this particular study that focuses on female genital mutilation amongst the Sudanese migrants in Greater Cairo. We'll continue the conversation after the break. Stay with us.
Benjamin Moshatama and Palesa on the move.
We're looking at a very important and interesting study speaking about female genital mutilation among Sudanese migrants in Greater Cairo. That is the name of the study, Female Genital Mutilation among Sudanese Migrants in Greater Cairo, Perceptions and Trends. And we still have on the line with us Paleki Ayang, gender advisor in the Middle East and North Africa region, who's joining us to chat about this conversation. Paleki, it's very important, as you highlighted, that, a lot of people who are, migrants from Sudan still view FGM as a means of maintaining cultural identity. But in some of the in-depth interviews that you had, there are some positive attitudes towards abandoning FGM. Tell us about the people specifically who have these positive attitudes of banning FGM and their reasonings behind it.
Thank you very much for asking that important question. The positive attitudes that the people had is that the fact that they're in a new country and a new environment, away from their family, with most of them with very minimal legal protection, also puts them in a situation whereby they do not want to continue the practice. Some of the positive attitudes came directly from, let's say, grandmothers or mothers who talked about their lived realities, about their personal experiences, and how FGM has affected them psychologically, health-wise, and many other ways. And they speak about how they do not want that harmful practice to continue on to the coming generation. They do not want their daughters and their granddaughters to experience the same thing. So the positive attitudes, there's an interplay between the context they're in, the realities they're living, vis-a-vis their own personal and lived realities as well. Their personal experiences shape their perception and their decision also on whether they want to continue FGM or not.
With that being said, men still have certain attitudes that are negative. Tell us a little bit about those, because it seems, according to your research, men want to see a continuation of FGM.
Actually, not necessarily.
Okay.
What we found out is that men actually do not know much about FGM.
Okay.
No less than the mothers and the grandmothers and the young girls themselves. That's one thing that we found out in this study. However, we also got some responses from men who talked about how their partners or their wives who have undergone FGM also had complications during birth, and also they had issues, let me say, during intimacy. So they found, they said that they actually do not want this practice to continue. But what we found, that their knowledge of the details of the different types of FGM, or what the law says exactly, was very minimal.
Is that a positive, getting these insights from the ground, where people definitely feels like there is a rebuttal against FGM? And does that mean that the practice is less practiced?
What we find in this study is that despite displacement creating new conditions for displaced, for migrants, Sudanese migrants in Egypt, we find that those who were practicing FGM in Sudan are likely to find ways to continue the practice. Those who were not practicing in Sudan are likely to not continue the practice in Egypt. And one of the things that we found contributed to the likelihood of the practice continuing is the settings, what we called in the report smaller Sudans. The way Sudanese community have resided in Egypt, they live in specific neighborhoods, if I may say. So that's why we picked like areas like Faisal, areas like 6th October. These areas are highly populated by Sudanese community. What that means then is that they are likely to find a midwife. They are likely to also interact with people who encourage or want to continue the practice. So that setting of the small Sudan is likely to contribute to the continuation of the practice amidst Sudanese communities in Egypt. That's what we found. But those who have already abandoned the practice back home in Sudan are less likely to continue the practice. That's what the report, the study found.
In the report, it's not just about social awareness, which of course, is a huge part of the continuation of, traditions and cultures like FGM. But there's also a huge issue with legal awareness when it comes to the issue of FGM, which is both illegal in Sudan and in Egypt, but still practiced in cultural circles. So how much legal awareness do people have, and how does that, impact their thinking around female genital mutilation?
In terms of legal awareness, we found that people know that FGM is illegal, but they don't know the details. They don't know what the penalty is. They don't know whether the law specifies if FGM is carried out, if the practice is carried out, who exactly gets punished, let me say. So it's true that Egypt does have a strong anti-FGM law. In theory, in paper, but the practice is still happening. It's illegal, it's banned, but people find ways to continue this practice. So it's very important to create legal awareness amongst Sudanese immigrants on the consequences of them engaging or practicing this FGM. So the people that we interviewed, some of them spoke very vaguely about what they understand. They said, some of them said it was probably illegal, so they were not very sure of the details on the specifics. And as I mentioned, they were not very sure about what the punishment is. However, there is fear. There's a fear factor here. So migrants worry that because of their residence and legal status in Egypt, they worry that, interacting with law enforcement could lead to arrest, could lead to deportation, and many other issues. So there is a lot of silence there. So when we speak about and legal education, I think this needs to be done, I think, not only to Sudanese, but to the wider community. I mean, Egyptians and Sudanese are in one way or another interacting in Egypt. However, this awareness or this information that we're putting out, it should be accessible as well through platforms that are used by the Sudanese themselves, whether it's, I don't know, social media, peer education, community, whatever platform that the Sudanese are present on, these messages should be there. The messages also should be framed in a way that we want to focus on preventing and protecting and not necessarily punishing. And I think that approach would encourage more families to abandon the practice. So there's a mixture of legal awareness, there's a mixture of building trust as well. I think that's the first, that would be a good step in the direction of building compliance with the law, basically.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Sounds like an incredible study, and the recommendations definitely are great. Obviously, looking from policy all the way down to, societal recommendations where, the end game is to end FGM, hopefully not just in Sudan and Egypt, but all across the world. So thank you so much for your time and your insights on the study, Paleki.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Paleki Ayang, gender advisor in the Middle East and North Africa region, speaking about a study titled Female Genital Mutilation Amongst Sudanese Migrants in Greater Cairo, Perceptions and Trends. It's 9:30 Central Africa time. Let's get our latest sports news.